So, James, so just talking about what you just talked about, which was last principles. I mean, I have to say, when you were talking, especially about the advice you got given and the stuff around Tanya, and it makes me a little bit emotional. Um, the way she was treated. You got people praying. I mean, you couldn't make that. I don't think. I don't. Could you make? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's almost they were
You
praying for
can't
Tanya.
make it up.
They were praying for Tanya to be
To be
adulterous. I mean,
adultery.
you just you. It's kind of almost mind blowing. I mean, you know, sometimes with the ICOC and religion in general, you think you've heard it all, and then and I've even heard that story before. You shared it on eavesdropping, um, or shared some of it on eavesdropping, and but when you shared it just now, just the fact that Tanya took the call and
Mm.
people praying that for you to be adulterous, it's like people are praying for you to be adulterous, Tanya. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. I'm sorry, it's mind blowing. And Lost Principles, it was like, oh my gosh, like how deep did we go?
It's true, Matthew.
It's crazy, man. And to be honest, when you put that on eavesdropping, when you shared that on eavesdropping, and this is my self-righteousness. This is my self-righteousness. I was like, that should kill the church. Like that should be, oh my, that should be the ICOC should all look at that and go, like, hold on, stop everything, stop evangelism, stop but hold on, what, what, what? Because we all know you shared about the two. I was told not to date certain sisters. Like, I obviously never got to the level of what happened to you, but I was told not to date certain sisters. They're not ready. They're not this. They're not. Definitely, sisters were told not to date me. He's not a spiritual. You're not right together. I know black and white couples who were told not to go together because, he might lead a. They want him to be a white couple so he can lead a ministry in the north of England, and I think of a particular couple. They ended up getting married, but they very much wanted. There was a lot of pressure put on them. They were kind of ostracized. It was like
Right.
they'd been disobedient to leadership. So there was a whole. So the fact that when you told that story, it's not like that story is just completely out of the blue, and there's similar stories that come out these days with Kip and the ICC and people being, people being set up with wives. I've heard other stories of, so it's not like it's completely alien to the culture. It's part of the culture. So so that was just I don't even know what to say about that. And then the other thing was about Mark. I just wanted to say I'm sure Mark in India was having a quiet time every day and probably was having an awesome quiet time. So I don't think Mark was being hypocritical. But I do think he'd obviously thought this is the way you do it. You make
Right.
sure, and that was the way we did things. That was Kip's thing.
It's the way he was taught.
Yeah, we're going to make sure that people are committed. It's like we're going to make sure that, and and if we can't do it, if they're not doing it by love, they're going to do it by shame, or we're going to do it by setting up discipline, or we're going to make this thing happen. And so I think that was part of the culture. And then I guess the question I have for you, and I'm not, and I say this in love and as a friend, and I think it's because I should ask this question of you. So when that situation with the evangelist, he's sleeping with a lot of prostitutes, and then he comes back, and you're still in the church at that point. And the situation with you and the other leader in London, you hadn't had your quiet times, but you lied about it, and the stuff that happened with Chuck as well. So you could see you had a behind the scenes view to the hypocrisy. But at that point, I'm sure that contributed to you leaving. I have no doubt that those things fed into why you left. But why did you why did you stay at that point? And if
I, I
answer it
just
any way you want. Yeah.
I distinctly remember this one, by the way,
Yeah.
so it's easy to answer.
Okay.
5 times, maybe 10 times when I was in Boston training
Mm.
to go to London, things like this would happen. I'll mention at least 6 or 10 of them today. I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, over the next few days. But when I would talk with other leaders, and by the way, my leaders, my friends, closest friends at that time were Doug Arthur and Steve Johnson. I was friends with Terry Stanfield as well, also, and Doug Blau. These were all the first major leaders that were hired. So I would bring things up to them. I can't recall if they brought the same up to me or not. Maybe not that important, but when I would bring it up, the talk would generally go like this: do you think you could do a better job? James, do you think you could do a better job leading the world in this quest than Kip is doing? So they would never argue and say, that's not true. Kip did not mean that. He didn't say that. He wasn't as harsh as you think. Never. Acknowledged all of it. But would say, do you think you could do a better job leading? And the answer was no from me. And it wasn't even close. I was a young Christian. I mean, I was less than a year old in Christ when I moved to Boston. So, and got on staff shortly thereafter. I knew very little. I didn't understand the organization of it all. I didn't like the way it was being organized, but I didn't understand it all. And so the question of, could you do a better job? When the answer is no, it kind of stops that ongoing criticism and how do we resolve these things? And the second argument, which also worked, we're doing a lot of good things. I know we're doing good things because I'm watching them. The good outweighs the bad. There's no doubt there's bad. I wasn't fooled into thinking those things were not so bad. But a baptism, a soul that was going to burn forever, that's now going to rejoice forever, that's pretty big. And that was happening every day. The good outweighs the bad was my thought process until it no longer was. So that's the
No,
answer.
no, I appreciate you sharing that. And do you think for you, this is going to be, and maybe I shouldn't ask you this, but I'm going to anyway. I had a chat yesterday. We had a Zoom call and I chatted. There's a brother who, who's in the ministry and he was sharing very honestly about what his motive, looking back after many years, looking back, and we all shared. It wasn't just him. We all shared, like, I was fearful of that. I liked the attention. I liked the attention when I got meant. For me, when I got mentioned in a sermon, be like, oh, I got mentioned in a sermon, or you try and get time with the big leaders, and then you want to be the evangelist. You'd want to be, there was status and power, and obviously that, you know, different levels. So he was sharing some stuff. So I guess for you, do you think that was going on with you? Do you look back and think, wow, I liked being James Lloyd? I don't, and I'm not putting this on you, James, because we're all different. So I'm not saying this has to be true, because I'm not saying that. I'm just asking, like, do you think, because this is the brass tacks of almost like what was going on inside us, like that.
Honestly, I don't see that in me. I
Yeah.
did not see that in me. I
Mm,
saw some of that later, but
yeah.
honestly, I was a baby Christian when I moved. I was a baby Christian when I
Yeah.
moved up to Boston,
Yeah.
and it was exciting for me to be a part of something that was so powerful.
Mm,
I don't think it was about, look at me, James Lloyd.
yeah.
I don't even think I had that same, let me preach, let me get up there and speak. Although I believed I had a gift and still believe I had a gift from God to speak,
Mm,
that wasn't my favorite part of being in
mm,
the church.
Mm,
I did love encouraging people.
mm,
And I felt like I focused on that more than I did rebuking people.
mm,
That's just who I was as a person. I wanted my life to count.
mm.
I I really wanted my life to count, and I felt like when I was doing this, my life was counting. So at some point, at what level narcissism crept in, don't know. But I will say this: I always viewed it as more severe in the other leaders than I did in myself. And that may be totally wrong. And that may be a factor of narcissism. That may be a factor of defensiveness. But honestly, I would literally sit there and watch a lot of our full time leaders preach or interact. And I would think, thank God I'm not like that guy. Thank God I'm not like that guy. So I
Yeah,
had that in me,
sure.
but I always, I
I
didn't
had
want
that
to
as
be in the
well.
mold. I did not want to be in the mold of a Gainesville preacher or a Boston preacher. I never did.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you.
Well, good questions. Good
Yeah.
questions.
You
Well, let
carry
me
on.
introduce
Yeah.
our topic, which is one Lord, one faith, three baptisms. And for anyone that would hear me and go, wait a minute, that's supposed to be one Lord, one faith, and one baptism. I don't like it, James. I don't like it when your humor creeps into something like this is spiritual. These are scriptures of God. And for you to change that scripture so that it fits in with your point, I don't like it. Let me tell you what I don't like. I don't like the fact that we treated baptism the way we did when I was in the church. So I might even be more wanting to keep it pure than you. The fact that it became three baptisms or four or five, that's an indication of how off track we were. Let me quote from the Henry Crete letter. I think it's the only quote I have as of now from the Henry Crete letter, page 15. This is Henry's quote. In earlier days, we have rebaptized hundreds and claimed them on our stat sheets as first time baptisms, as if trying to fool everyone. I know this practice has ceased, but it revealed an ominous foreshadowing of our present obsession, validation by numbers. That's the Henry Crete quote saying, oh, we did a lot of rebaptisms and counted them as fresh numbers. And then he goes, I know this practice has ceased, which by the time the letter was released, it had largely ceased. But what Henry wasn't around for, and what I'm going to share, is what made it grow so fast, rebaptisms, and what happened that made it cease, because I was in that story. Rebaptisms. Perhaps, this is my opinion, there's no greater proof of misaligned principles. Perhaps there's no greater proof of last principles than this. It's a pure demonstration of legalism and lack of grace. Remember, we're the only church saved in the world. Let's start with that. And we're the only people that are heaven bound. And baptism is a central part of that plan. Let me tell you, in a traditional Church of Christ, let's just go traditional COC. It was not unusual for a child to be baptized at age 12, even 10, in a traditional church. But again, when that same child grew up and went around to a teen camp at age 16 or 17, not unusual at all to have a second dunk at that time. Then they might go to college, attend a campus ministry like the one at Crossroads. Sorry, you need a third dunking. A third? Yeah. You're here now. This is the discipleship baptism. They don't even teach that in the regular Church of Christ. So, yeah, you're still lost. You're 0 for 2. You've had 2 baptisms. You're still on your way to hell. So you need to get baptized here at Crossroads, discipleship baptism, and now you can feel great about it. Yay, I did it. Oh, you're moving to Boston now to get more training? There likely needs to be a 4th baptism now. But I just got baptized at Crossroads. It was the discipleship baptism. Yeah, we know that. But from the top and from the start, those are words I can use very clearly in all of these talks. From the top and from the start. I was there. And I've told you many times I was in Boston months before Kip ever arrived. And when Kip arrived, when we had our first Sunday sermon at the Lexington Church of Christ, 2 people got baptized. 2 students that he brought with him, drove with them across from Illinois to Boston. And then we had the first service and they both got baptized. Why? How could it be that the night before our first service, all of a sudden those students realized this is it? No, of course not. Now baptism's a spectacle. Now it's just it's a nice formality to show everybody in the room what we're doing and what we're going to be about. Forget the part about them being lost and needing to be baptized to have their sins forgiven. By the way, what if those students had died in a car crash on their way to Boston? You know, the ones that you wanted to showcase on the first Sunday? What about that? Because our understandings of baptisms are pretty strong. I'll tell you another reason he wanted to baptize them on the first Sunday. Because he wanted people to be loyal to him and to his new movement. And the more people that could watch those baptisms, the better. Kip wanted to be able to tell a story that he told for years. Excuse me as I start to tell it. I've memorized it, and you have too. And on that first Sunday, one of the elders' wife, Helen, came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you, Kip. Thank you so much for me being able to watch those baptisms today. It has been years since we have witnessed a baptism in this church." Kip wanted to tell that story, and he did for decades. It didn't take long before a lot of leaders from Crossroads Church moved to Boston to be better trained. Oh, what are we going to do now? These are leaders. Well, let's get them baptized. No, they're leaders from Crossroads. This is where we learned a lot of the stuff that we're doing. Yeah, but they were baptized there, not here. So as those leaders would come, and by the way, I don't care what you ever say about Crossroads. Had Crossroads not been around when we started Boston, Boston wouldn't have happened, and the impact we had would not have happened. Just go ahead and admit it. The Crossroads maturity of a lot of those men and women that came up to Boston made a massive difference in sending out teams. But they had to get baptized. So many of them. And I'd say, Kip, I don't understand why they have to get rebaptized, because they're disciples. So why? I mean, is their salvation being questioned? Is it because they never repented? Is it because they're not committed? No, Kip would say, and he would say, these are quotes, When we rebaptize them, it's great for Boston's growth numbers. Those are fresh stats for us. Also, they'll be more loyal to me, not Chuck. Kip would say that even before the next one, which is they'll be more loyal to my new movement than the Crossroads movement. I'm sorry. I'm back to last principles again. What the heck were we doing? Years later, I was in Boston, and one of the top leaders ever at Crossroads had just moved to Boston, he and his wife. When I saw Kip that night, he was giddy. He was giddy with excitement. What is that? What? Do you know the big leader couple we just got from Crossroads? Yes. I just baptized her tonight. The wife. You know what that means? What? He's not far behind. We're going to baptize them both. So excited. Had nothing to do with them being lost and now saved. And I said, why is it so necessary every time to rebaptize the people, the leaders? And he said this time, it really humbles out the big leader. Humbles out. It's not even good English. It really humbles out those leaders, the big leaders. And now they're baby Christians. I will have a lot more influence over them. And now they're going to be grateful to me for their salvation. Excuse me, what? What was that one? Because I think I just caught something that doesn't seem quite right. They're going to be grateful to you for their salvation. Yes. And they'll be more loyal to me than to Chuck. Last principles. And by the way, we're talking about baptism, folks. We're talking about one of the most important parts. It's a sacrament. We don't even use the word sacrament. It's a sacrament. You don't play around with baptism. Not in our group, but we did. You know what? You asked me recently, Matthew, did I ever get rebaptized? And I didn't. October 8th, 1978. I studied the Bible with Doug Arthur in North Carolina at a traditional Church of Christ called Coal Mill Road in Durham. So how did I avoid rebaptism? Oh, it got brought up several times to me. I never gave it thought. I never doubted. The subject rarely came up until I was a week away from leaving the full-time ministry and moving to Atlanta. I'm in Boston. It's time for me to go. A new life is starting for me. I will not be in the ministry any longer. And I got a call from Kip. We need to meet. He was at Doug Arthur's house. He was at the Gimple's house in Concord. Concord. Kip had his plan. One last effort. I showed up at the house. He was the only one there, sitting at the kitchen table. I said, what's up? He said, I got a plan. It's going to work. It's going to get you back in the ministry. What is it? James, you must get rebaptized. I said, there's no need. I'm saved. Listen, this will work. Let me rebaptize you. It'll be a fresh start. It will encourage Tanya because you will be the baby Christian. That's back to that philosophy. It's going to humble out the big leader, make him a baby Christian. And he added, it's going to encourage Tanya because you'll be the baby Christian. She will not be in your shadow. Last principles. I said, I'm going to go for a 30-minute walk and think about this. And I went off for the walk and I called Doug. He was in London. And I told him about it. Of course, Doug had studied with me. And when I got back to see Kip, Doug had already called him. And Kip said, I spoke to Doug. The subject is dropped. I'm leaving. And got in his car and he drove off. So was my baptism valid? Of course it was. By the way, you want some proof? Never told this one before. Here's a brand new story. By the way, Doug Arthur will listen to this and he will laugh. And I will tell you right now, he will be saying to the screen, it's true. I verify every word of what James is saying. When Doug studied the Bible with me, we did a lot of our studies out in my car. We would just sit in the parking lot of the apartment where he lived. And one night we were sitting there and he said, tonight we're going to talk about sin. And we're going to talk about every sin you've done before, James. And I said, okay. And he said, you sit there behind the wheel of your car. I'm going to sit here beside you. We're going to look at the scriptures and then you just share. Well, dude, my heart was as wide open as anything. I not only shared about Galatians 5:19 scriptures, I went into sins I did that weren't even listed in Galatians 5. I mean, I was just reeling them off that night. I thought, well, if this is the time where you get them all out to get them forgiven, here, I'll give you all of them. And I just kept going. Years later, Doug told me, years later, we were in London. Years later, he told me, I've never been as afraid as I was the night when you were in that car confessing your sins. I said, really? He said, I've never told you this before, but the whole time we were studying and you were sitting right beside me, I had my right hand on the door handle of the car we were sitting in. Why? Because I didn't know you, I didn't trust you, and the more things I'd heard that you had done, I was fearing for my life. I didn't know if you would snap on me at any given second. I'm just telling you, my right hand was on the door handle for that whole study. So yeah, I think I confessed pretty well. I think my confessions were pretty much more than that was even asked or imagined. And lastly, remembering Henry Creek's words, it stopped. I'm going to tell you why it stopped. I'm proud of this, what I'm about to share. But it unfortunately comes with another confession that I'm embarrassed about. I was so concerned about the rebaptisms when I was in London that I called Al Baird. And I went over everything with him. This is out of control. Everybody is so obsessed with numbers. Ministers are preaching doubt to get their members rebaptized to count for fresh stats. That's what's going on, and it's not just in London. And he listened. He said, why do you think it's happening? I said, I think we're too obsessed with the numbers. I think ministers' paychecks depend on it. If we don't have the right growth, we're going to get replaced. And he said, this is horrible. Give me 3 days. I'm going to solve it. Al Baird, I was living in Clapham. He called me. I still remember. I said, I wasn't expecting a call this quickly. He said, I figured it out. I've got it done. The issue is dealt with. And evidently it was pretty well dealt with because by the time Henry Crete wrote the letter, he went, it used to be that way, but not now. So what could have changed? What could have been so radical that it would have changed our desire to get more numbers, even if we were preaching doubt to the saved? And Albert said, it's this simple. I've written a memo to everyone around the world. Rebaptisms no longer count for new stats. That was it. He said it worked. Everybody understands it. We didn't even get them called in yesterday. Do you know the last time we had a 0 day with no rebaptisms? They're not doing it. And all it took, Al, was for you to say they no longer count for fresh stats. That's all it took. Time out. Pause. Pause. I hear your producer telling me in my ear. Pause. Let that one sink in. Let it sink in for a second what it took to stop the rebaptisms in our movement. It took one of the top leaders saying, we're not going to count them anymore. And that's all it took. Last principles? Last principles. My gosh. Do you know we were actually preaching doubt to people about their salvation right in the face of one Lord, one faith? We didn't preach there were two Lords. That wouldn't have worked. We didn't preach there were three faiths. You can go Christian, you can go Muslim, no. There's one Lord and there's one faith. Guess what? There's also only one baptism. So where did we come up with 3, 4, or 5, depending on our numbers that month? This is shameful. And one of the awkward things about bringing it up, there's people listening to this that did get baptized a second time, a third, a fourth, and I know one woman a sixth time, because the doubts that came their way, and they did not want to burn forever in hell. And he is the evangelist, and he alone has the words of God, and he's speaking from the Holy Spirit. I'm getting rebaptized. And what does it do for the people that got rebaptized 3 times and realize now it never was needed? The first one was sufficient. That creates weirdness altogether. But this has to be talked about. Confession. Although I'm proud that I called out Baird and said, you've got to put a stop to this, it's out of control. I'm proud of that. But here's where I slipped. When he fixed it, I didn't share that with others. When he acknowledged it was just a way for leaders that were hungry for numbers, I didn't share that. No, that was longer. I was no longer in Boston. I was in London when this was going on. And there was something, Matthew, and you go, well, why didn't you talk about it? There was something that made it really difficult to say. I'd like to share something that's going to throw everything on its head with this movement that we are convinced is the only one in the world that is right. I became Mary. I kept all those things and pondered them in my heart. That's about what I did. I knew it was wrong, but that's a confession. I could have exposed those horrible motives to the church and the world then, and perhaps would have made a difference. And I wish I had. I wish I had. I'm going for a pretty good while here without getting input from you. Anything to say about it or to ask?
If you've got more stuff you want, how are we doing for time? Have you finished that lesson?
That did finish that lesson.
And how are we doing? What's the time on that? Do you know?
Oh yeah. Well, we are so careful about not going over.
I love this. I love the time. I mean, it's funny for somebody who's not legalistic, for somebody who's like, I hate legalism. But let's stick to half an hour, whatever happens.
We're doing the people listening.
Yeah.
We're doing this for the people.
No, we are,
listening
and
to
it's
make
good.
it as
I think
easy
half
as possible.
Yeah, because we don't want to, people can just half an hour chat. But how are we doing for time, James?
1 minute left.
Let's there's too much to talk about. I mean, it's like,
bring something up.
Well, I struggled hugely with my own salvation, and I still struggle with this, James. So let me tell you something. I struggle with the idea that evangelists, leaders, consciously preach doubt into their congregation
100%.
in order to get a baptism from an already baptized disciple.
Yep.
I can't believe it. I'd need to hear like an evangelist, an ex-evangelist or somebody admit, hey, listen, I did that. I consciously. Now I could believe that subconsciously, or I'm like, did you really consciously do that? I mean, because I remember occasionally we'd have these things where it'd be like, oh, it seems like a lot of people in the congregation are questioning their salvation. We're going to have a talk about grace or something. And this would happen like once every year, once every couple of years. And then there'd be this talk, but it was always sort of, I'd be excited. Oh, good, because I'm constantly questioning my salvation. And we'd have this talk, but the talk would be kind of slightly relieving. Like, Jesus died for you, whatever it is. But there'd also be, but you must remember, you've still got to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So it was never completely like relieved. And it was only really much later through my own experiences that I started to begin to understand my understanding of grace that then became my understanding of love. But so the idea that preachers consciously did it, and I'm not condemning anybody. I'm just like, really? Do you think they consciously, like in their heads, they thought, I'm going to preach doubt because I need some baptisms and I'm going to try and convince one or two of these people to get rebaptized this month? Do you think that was consciously going on, James?
100%.
I mean, that just makes my.
Sometimes touching the eyes the first time doesn't work. All you can see is trees. Sometimes you need to touch them a second time, Jesus said, and use water. And there it is. By the way, I'm going to tell you this, not in my notes.
Yeah.
There was one woman in our congregation. I'm not going to mention her name. I have nothing but respect for this woman, but she moved to London from a traditional Church of Christ, and she was about the most spiritual, not biblical knowledge exceeded many of the men in the church leaders. She was brilliant. She was humble, serving, loving. I'm going to tell you this right now. That woman was a gift to our congregation, and she came to my zone. And she probably wouldn't even mind if I mention her name, but I don't want to mess with that. But she came to, by the way, any work that I did writing books when I was in London, if you want to see the writing that everybody was so impressed with, she did my writing. She was my ghostwriter. So I would read over it when she finished, but she would do a better job than I would. Oh, it's my bulletin article week. Sister, can you help? One time she came to me and said, I never got baptized in the movement. I said, it doesn't matter. You were baptized. Yeah. You repented, right? Yeah. How did your life change after when you were in traditional church? Why did you come here? You were in a traditional church. And all of her answers showed lordship of Christ. All of her answers. And this woman was living it. And she said, do you think it'd be safer just to do another baptism just because I'm here in your church? No. Honor that day. Honor that minister that studied with you, or honor the decision you made with discipleship that was so powerful. You left everyone you knew and moved here to a church that you didn't even know about. No. And then she came to me a week later and said, I've been thinking and praying all about it, and I feel better about my baptism now. And I said, well, I hope so, because I told Tanya, if you're not saved, we're in trouble in the London Church of Christ, because I don't know how many of us are going to be saved. And she laughed and we hugged. I was in India 2 weeks later at a conference with Doug Arthur and Kip. I was sitting with Doug at breakfast. She walked up to the table and said, guess who just got baptized? You did? Yeah, I met with Kip this morning. Just met with him. And I said, I've been having some thoughts. And he said, give me a few minutes of your story. And I did. And he went, yeah, you ought to just go and baptize. So he baptized me. And I looked at Doug and I went, this is really old for me right now. I'm not happy with this. This has an impact on me that you don't understand. Because I'd spent so many hours with her, and Kip just said, let's just do it right now. I'll baptize you. That to me happened way too often. Now, we've got to close for time. Hey, I'll tell you this. The next topic we have is even more powerful, because the title of it is Power is Intoxicating.
James, let's leave it that. I found that some reason it makes me very emotional. That's funny. I don't know why.
I'll know why, because I paused to let it sink in what the heck was going on with our group.
I think it's the sadness of, like, I think it's that people were purposefully trying to get people to doubt their salvation. That to me is just, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's equivalent. It's not that far off from praying for Tanya to be adulterous. I mean, it's very similar. And I'm not trying to use this because I struggled so much with my salvation, so much. Like I would be sitting in church just going, now, did I believe Jesus was Lord? Did did my foot go down in the baptistry? Did I understand? Maybe I've committed the unforgivable sin. Maybe, like years. I had years of that mental torment. And that chance of a lifetime I shared before when I was in India, when I was in Australia, they wanted me to get rebaptized. At the time, it was
They,
because they didn't
they,
think I was a true disciple.
they were lacking in numbers a little bit at the time.
Probably. And Archie, I'm going to say Archie's name because I love Archie and
Sure.
whatever. But Archie, God bless him, he he said not they talked to him. He was my original sort of discipler, or my the guy who studied the Bible, the leader in London that I had most connection with. And he said no, he's fine because they studied with me. So uh, I didn't, but I spent years. I spent especially the first 7 years I was in the church. I well the after the first year, the sort of 6 years, for about 6 years, I spent 6 years constantly questioning my salvation, like pretty much daily, whole days, like it tormented me because I
Yeah.
couldn't work out why it wasn't working for me. Why am I not happy? What? So when I guess the idea that preachers would like instill doubt, it's like, it's like, what are you doing to me, man? It's like, so thank you so much for sharing all that, James. And
Let
I've
me just say one thing I did learn is the ministers that studied with people years ago were the ones that would speak and go, he doesn't need to get rebaptized. I was there. What do you think I am? A loser? What do you think I'm baptizing people that aren't ready? Doug Arthur never questioned my baptism. Why? Because he studied with me.
I mean,
It's just one of the unique things about us that we know how screwed up it is. But if I was studying, no, that would be an insult to me if you rebaptize. Hey, so are we going to go away and come back for our next session?
yes, yes. Let me. I haven't stopped recording, so let me stop recording. Hold on, that's all there.